What's up, people? I've read a couple of speeches from the fictional character known as B, whose teachings are very much non-fictional and apply to this realm. Um, they're a little long. I understand if it's like not super entertaining. It's kind of boring, I guess, in a sense, but I get that, and like I'm doing it anyway because I feel like this information is super crucial. I'll try to like intonate my voice in ways to make it more entertaining. But just give it a chance because these speeches are freaking crucial in terms of just like seeing the world in a new way, in a different way, from a different perspective. I don't necessarily, my worldview is probably a little more dynamic, but at the same time, this dude's writing this in 96 or in the early 90s, published in 96, 97. So I think, he's super fucking on point. Anyways, enough rambling. I'm going to get right into the next one. But I will say this for a little bit more perspective on the story itself, the story of B. These readings that I'm doing are just speeches. This is actually a really well-written story, and these speeches are like the appendix. So when you get to the speech in the actual story, it'll tell you to go to the appendix and read the actual speech. He actually separates the story, which is very entertaining, and I'd highly recommend, from the speeches, which are a little bit more academic. But again, I'm reading these knowing it's boring because they're that good. So please give them a chance. To the people that have given them a chance, I hope you would agree with me. And I'm going to keep at it. And I'll put a little playlist together of his speeches, specifically when I'm done with the several that are left. Tonight's is called The Collapse of Values. Before our era, the chorus of distress that had assembled over the 10,000 years of our cultural life consisted of 9 voices: war, crime, corruption, rebellion, famine, plague, slavery, genocide, and economic collapse. Beginning in 1960, our own era found a 10th voice to add to the chorus, a voice never heard before, and this is the voice of cultural catastrophe. A voice that wails of loss of vision, failure of purpose, and the collapse of values. Every culture has a defining place in the scheme of things, a vision of where it fits in the universe. There's no need for people to articulate this vision in words, for example, to their children, because it's articulated in their lives, in their history, their legends, their customs, their laws, their rituals, their arts, their dances, their stories, and their songs. Indeed, if you ask them to explain this vision, they won't know how to begin and may not even know what you're talking about. You might say that it's kind of low, murmurous song that's in their ears from birth, heard so constantly throughout their lives that it's never consciously heard at all. I know many of you are familiar with the work of my colleague Ishmael. This is part of the Ishmael trilogy by Daniel Quinn. Ishmael is the most popular book he wrote. If you're a book reader, you might have heard of that one. Who called the singer of this song Mother Culture and identified the song itself as nothing less than mythology. That's what we're talking about here, mythology. The famous mythologist Joseph Campbell lamented the fact that nowadays the people of our culture have no mythology, but as Ishmael showed us, not all mythology comes from the mouths of bards and storytellers around the fire. Another sort has come to us from the mouths of emperors, lawgivers, priests, political leaders, and prophets. Nowadays, it comes to us from the pulpits of our churches, from film screens and television screens, from the mouths of clergy, school teachers, news commentators, novelists, pundits. It's not a mythology of quaint tales, but a mythology that tells us what the gods had in mind when they made the universe and what our role in that universe is. A people can no more function without this sort of mythology than an individual can function without a nervous system. It's the organizing principle of all our activities. It explains to us the meaning of everything we do. It can happen that circumstances may shatter a culture's vision of its place in the scheme of things, may render its mythology meaningless, may strangle its song. When this happens, and it's happened many times, things fall apart in this culture. Order and purpose are replaced by chaos and bewilderment. People lose the will to live, become listless, become violent, become suicidal, and take to drink, drugs, and crime. The matrix that once held all in place is now shattered, and laws, customs, and institutions fall into disuse and disrespect, especially among the young, who see that even their elders can no longer make sense of them. If you'd like to study some peoples who have been destroyed in this way, there's no shortage of sites to visit in the United States, Africa, South America, New Guinea, Australia, wherever in fact Aboriginal peoples have been crushed under the wheels of our cultural juggernaut. Or you can just stay at home. You no longer need to travel to the ends of the earth to find people who have become listless, violent, and suicidal, who have taken to drink, drugs, and crime, whose laws, customs, and institutions have fallen into disuse and disrespect. We ourselves have fallen under the wheels of our juggernaut, and our own vision of our place in the scheme of things has been shattered. Our own mythology has been rendered meaningless, and our own song has been strangled in our throats. These are the things that we all sense. It doesn't matter where you go or who you talk to, a rancher in Montana, a diamond merchant in Amsterdam, a stockbroker in New York, or a bus driver in Hamburg. I'm just old enough to remember a time when it wasn't so. And certainly my parents remember that time, as do yours. I'm certainly not talking about the good old days here. The chorus of distress was in full voice. Heaven knows it was, since I'm talking about the decades following the most destructive and murderous war in human history. Even so, in the late 40s and 50s, the people of our culture still knew where they were going, were still confident that a glorious future lay just ahead of us. All we had to do was hold on to the vision and keep doing all the things that got us here in the first place. We could count on those things. They were the things that had brought us universities and opera houses, central heating and elevators, Mozart and Shakespeare, ocean liners and motion pictures. What's more, and you must mark this, the things that got us here were good things. In 1950, there wasn't the slightest whisper of a doubt about this anywhere in our culture, East or West, capitalist or communist. In 1950, this was something everyone could agree on. Exploiting the world was our God-given right. The world was created for us to exploit. Exploiting the world actually improved it. There was no limit to what we could do. Cut as much down as you like, dig up as much as you like, scrape away the forests, fill in the wetlands, dam the rivers, dump poisons anywhere you want, as much as you want. None of this was regarded as wicked or dangerous. Good heavens, why should it be? The earth was created specifically to be used in this way. It was a limitless, indestructible playroom for humans. You simply didn't have to consider the possibility of running out of something or damaging something. The earth was designed to take any punishment, to absorb and sweeten any toxin in any quantity. Explode nuclear weapons? Hell yeah. As many as you want. Thousands if you like. Radioactive material generated while trying to achieve our God-given destiny can't harm us. Wipe out a whole species? Fuck yeah! He actually says absolutely. I'm emphasizing here. Why ever not? If people don't need these creatures, then obviously they're superfluous. To exercise such control over the world is to humanize it, is to take us a step closer to our destiny. Listen, in 1948, Paul Mueller of Switzerland received a Nobel Prize for his wonderful work with dichloroDiphenyl trichloroethane, considered the ideal chemical means of wiping out unwanted insect species. Perhaps you don't recognize it by that name. I'm talking about DDT. In the 1950s and 60s, DDT flowed across the earth like milk and honey, like ambrosia. Everyone knew it was a deadly poison. Of course it was a deadly poison. That was the whole point. We could use it as much as we liked because it can't harm us. The earth, doing its job, would see to that. It would swallow all that wonderful, deadly poison and give us back sweet water, sweet land, and sweet air. It would always and forever swallow all the radioactive wastes, all the industrial wastes, all the poisons we could generate, and give us back sweet water, sweet land, and sweet air. This was the contract. This was the vision itself. The world was made for man, and man was made to conquer and rule it. This is what we'd been hearing about from the beginning. Conquering and ruling, taking the world as if it had been fashioned for our exclusive use, using what we wanted and discarding the rest. Destroying the rest as superfluous. This was not wicked work. Please note again, this is holy work. This is what God created us to do. And please don't imagine that this was something we learned from Genesis, where God told Adam to fill the earth and subdue it. This is something we knew before Jerusalem, before Babylon, before Ketal, whatever, before Jericho, before Ali Kosh, before Zawi Kimi Sheneder. This isn't something the authors of Genesis taught us. This is something we taught them. Let me say again, as I must on every occasion, that this was not the human vision, not the vision that was born in us when we became Homo habilis, or when Homo habilis became Homo erectus, or when Homo erectus became Homo sapien. This is the vision that was born in us when our particular culture was born 10,000 years ago. This was the manifesto of our revolution, to be carried to every corner of the earth. The truth of this manifesto wasn't doubted by the builders of the ziggurats of Ur or the pyramids of Egypt. It wasn't doubted by the hundreds of thousands who labored off to wall off China from the rest of the world. It wasn't doubted by the traders who carried gold and glass and ivory from Thebes to Nippur and Larsa. It wasn't doubted by the scribes of the Hittites and the Elamites and the Mitanni who first pressed the record of imperial conquest onto clay tablets. It wasn't doubted by the iron workers who carried their potent secrets from Babylon to Nineveh and Damascus. It wasn't doubted by Darius of Persia or Philip of Macedon or Alexander the Great. It wasn't doubted by Confucius or Aristotle. It wasn't doubted by Hannibal or Julius Caesar or Constantine, Christianity's first imperial protector. It wasn't doubted by the marauders who scavenged the bones of the Roman Empire, the Huns, the Vikings, the Arabs, the Avars, and others. It wasn't doubted by Charlemagne or Genghis Khan. It wasn't doubted by the Crusaders or by the Shiite assassins. It wasn't doubted by the merchants of the Hanseatic League. It wasn't doubted by Pope Alexander VI, who in 1494 decided how the entire world should be divided among the colonizing powers of Europe. It wasn't doubted by the pioneers of the scientific revolution, Copernicus and Kepler and Galileo. It wasn't doubted by the great explorers of the 16th and 17th centuries, and it certainly wasn't doubted by the conquerors and settlers of the New World. It wasn't doubted by the intellectual founders of the modern age, thinkers like Descartes, Adam Smith, David Hume, and Jeremy Bentham. It wasn't doubted by the pathfinders of the democratic revolution, political theorists like John Locke and Jean-Jacques Rousseau. It wasn't doubted by the countless inventors, tinkers, dabblers, investors, and visionaries of the Industrial Revolution. It wasn't doubted by the Luddite gangs who smashed up factories in the Midlands and north of England. It wasn't doubted by the industrial giants who built the railroads and armed the armies and rolled out the steel, the DuPonts, the Vanderbilts, the Krupps, the Morgans, and the Carnegies. It wasn't doubted by the authors of the Communist Manifesto, by the organizers of the labor movement, or by the architects of the Russian Revolution. It wasn't doubted by the rulers who plunged Europe into the maelstrom of World War I. It wasn't doubted by the authors of the Treaty of Versailles or by the architects of the League of Nations. It wasn't doubted by the Fellowship of Reconciliation or by the signers of the Oxford Pledge. It wasn't doubted by the scores of millions who were jobless during the Great Depression. It wasn't doubted by those who struggled to establish parliamentary democracy in Germany or by those who ultimately defeated them. It wasn't doubted by the hundreds of thousands who labored in an industry of death created to rid humanity of mongrel races. It wasn't doubted by the millions who fought World War II or by the leaders who had sent them to fight. It wasn't doubted by the hardworking scientists and engineers who exerted their best skills to rain down terror on the cities of England and Germany. What wasn't doubted again? The world was made for man, and man was made to conquer and rule it. That has been this culture's vision from the inception of the agricultural revolution. The last sentence was just me. The manifesto certainly wasn't doubted by rival teams that raced to split the atom and build a weapon capable of destroying our entire species. It wasn't doubted by the architects of the United Nations. It wasn't doubted by the hundreds of millions who in post-war years dreamed of a coming utopia where people would rest and all labor would be performed by robots, where atomic power would be limitless and free, where poverty, hunger, and crime would be obsolete. But that manifesto is doubted now, ladies and gentlemen, almost everywhere in our culture, in all walks of life, among the young and old, but especially among the young, for whom the dream of a glittering future in which life will become ever sweeter and sweeter and sweeter, decade after decade, century after century, has been exploded and is meaningless. Your children know better. They know better in large part because you know better. Only our politicians still insist that the world was made for man, and man was made to conquer and rule it. They must, as a professional obligation, still affirm and proclaim the manifesto of our revolution. If they want to hold on to their jobs, they must assure us with absolute conviction that a glorious future lies just ahead of us, provided that we march forward under the banner of conquest and rule. They reassure us of this, and then they wonder, year after year, why fewer and fewer voters go to the polls. Silent Spring and beyond. I've said that this new era of the collapse of values began in 1960. Strictly speaking, it should be dated to 1962, the year of Rachel Carson's Silent Spring, the first substantive challenge ever raised to the issue. It should be dated to 1962, the year of Rachel Carson's Silent Spring, the first substantive challenge ever issued to the motivating vision of our culture. The facts Carson brought forward, we're going to hear that a lot in the future, the facts Carson brought forward. This is a different Carson, though. To detail the devastating environmental effects of DDT and other pesticides were astounding. DDT didn't just do its intended job of killing unwanted insects, it had entered the avian food chain, disrupting reproductive processes and breaking down egg structures, with the result that many species had already been destroyed and many more were threatened, making it not unthinkable that the world might someday wake to a silent spring, a spring without birds. But Silent Spring wasn't just another sensational expose, welcome in any publishing season. With a single powerful blow, it shattered for all time a complex of fundamental articles of our cultural faith, that the world was capable of repairing any damage that we might do to it, that the world was designed to do precisely this, that the world was on our side, and our aggrandizement would always tolerate and facilitate our efforts, that God Himself had fashioned the world specifically to support our efforts to conquer and rule it. The facts in Silent Spring plainly contradicted all those ideas. Something presumably beneficial to us was not being tolerated and facilitated by the world. The world was not supporting our cultural vision. Still isn't. Pretty clutch. God was not supporting our cultural vision. The world was not unequivocally on our side. God was not unequivocally on our side. Let's go. If the matter had ended with Rachel Carson and DDT, our cultural vision would surely have cleared up and recovered. But as we all know, Rachel Carson and DDT were only the barest beginning. Carson was just the first to look, the first to show us that there was something new here to be seen. Dozens, hundreds, thousands have looked since then, and the more they've looked, the more they've shattered our cultural faith. I won't review it all here for you. In an evening, I could barely scratch the surface, and I'd only be telling you the things discoverable in any encyclopedia. Do your research. The fact that do your research is now, people like say that as a joke, like, oh, you're one of those do your research people. Listen to yourself, people. Do your research. It comes down to this. In our present numbers and enacting our present dreams, the human race is having a lethal impact upon the world. Lakes are dying, seas are dying, forests are dying, the land itself is dying for reasons directly traceable to our activities. As many as 140 species are vanishing every day for reasons directly traceable to our activities. Listen, I hear you squirming in your seats, but I'm not saying all these things to make you feel guilty. That's not my purpose. I'm here tonight to figure out what's gone wrong. Theories. What's gone wrong here? Figuring out what's wrong has become a global preoccupation. People of all ages are working on it. People of every social and economic class, every political persuasion. 10-year-old kids are trying to work it out. I know this because they talk to me about it. I know this because I've seen them pause in the midst of a game to give it their attention. Every year, more and more children are born out of wedlock. Every year, more and more children live in broken homes. Every year, more and more people are bruised and battered by crime. Every year, more and more children are abused and murdered. Every year, more and more women are raped. Every year, more and more people are afraid to walk the streets at night. Every year, more and more people commit suicide. Every year, more and more people become addicted to drugs and alcohol. Every year, more and more people are imprisoned as criminals. Every year, more and more people find routine entertainment in murderous violence and pornography. Every year, more and more people immolate themselves in lunatic cults, delusional terrorism, and sudden, uncontrollable bursts of violence. The theories that are advanced to explain these things are for the most part commonplace generalities, truisms, and platitudes. They are the received wisdom of the ages. For example, you'll hear that the human race is fatally and irredeemably flawed. You hear that the human race is sort of a planetary disease that Gaia will eventually shake off. You hear that the insatiable capitalist greed is to blame, or that technology is to blame. You hear that parents are to blame, or the schools are to blame, or rock and roll is to blame. Sometimes you hear that the symptoms themselves are to blame. Things like poverty, oppression, and injustice. Things like overcrowding, bureaucratic indifference, and political corruption. There are some of the theories advanced to explain what's gone wrong here. These are some of the common theories. You'll hear others. Most of them have to be deduced from the remedies that are proposed to correct them. Usually these remedies are expressed in this form. All we have to do is something. Elect the right party, get rid of this leader, handcuff the liberals, handcuff the conservatives, write stricter laws, give longer prison sentences, bring back the death penalty, kill the Jews, kill ancient enemies, kill foreigners, kill somebody, meditate, pray the rosary, raise consciousness, evolve to some new plane of existence. I want you to understand what I'm doing here. I'm proposing a new theory to explain what's gone wrong. This is not a minor variation, not a smartening up of conventional wisdom. This is something unheard of, something entirely novel in our intellectual history. Here it is. We're experiencing cultural collapse, the very same collapse that was experienced by the Plains Indians when their way of life was destroyed and they were herded onto reservations. The very same collapse that was experienced by countless Aboriginal peoples overrun by us in Africa, South America, Australia, New Guinea, and elsewhere. It matters not that the circumstances of the collapse were different for them and for us, the results were the same. For both of us, in just a few decades, shocking realities invalidated our vision of the world and made nonsense of a destiny that had always seemed self-evident. For both of us, the song we had been singing from the beginning of time suddenly died in our throats. The outcome was the same for both of us. Things fell apart. It doesn't matter whether you live in teepees or skyscrapers, things fall apart. Order and purpose are replaced by chaos and bewilderment. People lose the will to live, become listless, become violent, become suicidal, and take to drink, drugs, and crime. The matrix that once held all in place is shattered, and laws, customs, and institutions fall into disuse and disrespect, especially among the young, who see that even their elders can no longer make sense of them. And that's what's happened here to us. The frog smiled for 10,000 years as the water got hotter and hotter and hotter. But eventually, when the water began to boil at last, the smile became meaningless because the frog was dead. Circumstances have at last shattered our mad cultural vision, have at last rendered our self-aggrandizing mythology meaningless, have at last strangled our arrogant song. We've lost our ability to believe that the world was made for man, and that man was made to conquer and rule it. We've lost our ability to believe that the world will automatically and inevitably support us in our conquest, will swallow all the poison we can generate without coming to harm. We've lost our ability to believe that God is unequivocally on our side against the rest of creation. And so, ladies and gentlemen, we're going to pieces. At last, good news. A woman recently told me she wanted to bring a friend to hear me speak, but her friend said, "I'm sorry, but I can't stand to hear any more bad news." Yeah, it's funny, because you know that, oddly enough, you're here in this theater listening to me because you absolutely know that I'm a bringer of good news. Yep, that's so, and because you know it's so, you laugh. You're already feeling better. You're absolutely right to feel better, and here's why. It's really simple. Here's my good news. We are not humanity. Can you feel the liberation in those words? Try them out. Go ahead. Just whisper them to yourselves. We are not humanity. Or as Lil Weezy put it, I am not a human being. Fucking Weezy, baby. I know, I'm crazy, I know. I'm sure they seem bizarre, at the very least. Before we quit for tonight, I want you to understand why they seem so. We are not humanity. Putting them on is like putting on a stranger's shoes, mistaking them for your own. Your whole life changes in an instant. We are not humanity. I want you to understand what these 4 words are. They are a summary of all that was forgotten during the Great Forgetting. I mean that quite literally. At the end of the Great Forgetting, when the people of our culture began to build civilization in earnest, those 4 words were practically unthinkable. In a sense, that's what the Great Forgetting was all about. We forgot that we're only a single culture and came to think of our culture as humanity itself. All the intellectual and spiritual foundations of our culture were laid by people who believed absolutely that we are humanity itself. Socrates believed it, Plato believed it, Aristotle believed it, Buddha believed it, Confucius believed it, Moses believed it, Jesus believed it, St. Paul believed it, Muhammad believed it, Aquinas believed it, Copernicus believed it, Galileo believed it, Descartes believed it, though they could have easily known better. Hume, Hegel, Nietzsche, Marx, Kant, Kierkegaard, Bergson, Heidegger, Sartre, and Camus, they all took it for granted, though they certainly didn't lack the requisite information to know better. But you're bound to be wondering why it would be such a bad news if we were humanity. I'll explain. If we were humanity itself, then all the terrible things we say about humanity would be true. And that would be very bad news. If we were humanity itself, then all our destructiveness would belong not to one misguided culture, but to humanity itself. And that would be very bad news. If we were humanity itself, then the fact that our culture is doomed would mean that humanity itself is doomed. And that would be very bad news. If we were humanity itself, then the fact that our culture is the enemy of life on this planet would mean that humanity itself is the enemy of life on this planet, and that would be very bad news. If we were humanity itself, then the fact that our culture is hideous and misshapen would mean that humanity itself is hideous and misshapen. Very bad news indeed. If we are humanity, that is horror and despair. If the miserable and misguided creatures of our culture are humanity itself. But we're not humanity. We're just one culture. One culture out of hundreds of thousands that have lived their vision on this planet and sung their song. And that's wonderful news, even for us. If it were humanity that needed changing, we'd be shit out of luck. But it isn't humanity that needs changing. It's just our culture. And that's very good news. Stick with me. We'll get there, step by step. Buy the book.